around the family is diminishing. We often hear the phrase, "it takes a village to raise a child." What I believe this research suggests is that it takes a village to support a family. And for many families, the sense of support is no longer consistently there. I would also just briefly add that at the time of conducting the research, I was feelings of isolation at times and challenges around accessing consistent support. I think that's really important because it highlights that this is not only an issue for our most vulnerable families, even though they are of utmost importance, it is a more universal experience for many parents. However, one of the most important findings was this: even where the wider village is not present, one consistent trusted professional could make a significant difference. That leads to the key insight from the research. Relational support is not an added extra, it really is a foundational. But importantly, it's not something that can be left to individual goodwill either. It needs to be enabled by the system. The research suggests that the system does not consistently enable that. A central message from the study is that we need to move beyond seeing education and health as separate systems here, because for families these are not separate. A child's development, their attachment, communication, emotional well-being, mental health and readiness for learning are all interconnected, and these are fundamentally educational outcomes. The capacity to form relationships, to regulate emotion, to communicate, to build resilience in their mental health and to engage in learning really begins in these earliest years and is shaped by the support that families receive during that time. We are making progress here, most certainly in recognising areas such as infant mental health, and that's been very positive, but this remains a work in progress. If we're serious about improving outcomes in this area, we need a model where health and education are working together around the family, not operating in parallel. There are examples internationally to bring to you where this type of continuity has been more intentionally structured. For example, there's the example of a Finnish Nuvola system, which provides universal relationship-based support for families from pregnancy right through the early years. This has a strong emphasis on continuity, early identification and integration between both education and health. I'm not suggesting that this model could be directly transferred to Northern Ireland, but it does demonstrate what could be achieved when relational continuity is treated as a core part of early support rather than just an additional element. I think it's also important to recognise that Northern Ireland has already demonstrated what really good relational support can look like. For example, a programme called the ABC PIP programme within the South Eastern Trust was a relational-based intervention focused on strengthening attachment and parent-child relationships here. It was widely regarded as exemplary practice. Similarly, Parenting NI, later Parenting Focus, provided relational programmes for parents with a strong emphasis on inclusion, particularly the inclusion of fathers. I had direct involvement in delivering some of the work and saw the impact firsthand. However, unfortunately, both of these services have ceased in recent years due to funding constraint. These are not isolated examples. They reflect a wider pattern where strong evidence-based relational services are not sustained. And I think this highlights an area where further consideration might be needed. Because the issue is not that we don't know what works, the issue is that we're not sustaining what works. This brings me to the workforce. The workforce is the foundation really of everything I'm discussing today, and as you know, it's under significant strain. The challenges around recruitment, retention and capacity are well known, but what came through strongly in my research, particularly from stakeholders, is that we're now at a point where experienced, highly skilled and deeply committed professionals are beginning to leave the sector. Not because they lack commitment or passion in their roles, but because the demands of the roles are becoming unsustainable. The research evidenced that in some cases practitioners are experiencing in fact the same pressures as the families they support, emotionally, mentally and practically, and they're reaching a point where they can no longer continue in those roles. That emerges as a critical issue within my research, and I would add from my own experience working alongside the workforce over many years, and more recently teaching the future workforce, engaging with services as well as a parent, I have seen how these pressures are experienced both professionally and personally. It reinforces what came through in the research, that this is not about a lack of commitment within the workforce we have, but about the conditions in which they're working. Early intervention really is only as strong as the people who deliver it. Alongside this, the strategy's current focus on expanding provision is both necessary and welcome. As a parent myself, I understand the challenges facing families in accessing preschool places, as I have done myself. The research raises a concern that if provision expands, though without equal investment and professionalisation of our workforce, then there is a risk of diluting the quality that we have. And ultimately, it's the quality of interactions, those relationships, that make the greatest difference. There is also an important point to briefly highlight around fathers. The research identified a continued lack of visibility of fathers within our early years support. Services often remain centred on mothers, which can increase pressure on mothers while limiting opportunities for fathers to engage fully. There is also a wider workforce element to this. The early years sector remains overwhelmingly female, and in my research I had the opportunity to speak with a small number of male professionals whose insight highlighted the value of broader representation, not only for children, but for how services engage fathers. This has implications not only for equality, but for parental mental health and family wellbeing more broadly. Supporting fathers to be more fully included could reduce pressures with families and improve outcomes for children. So I think the key message here is not about a single solution. It's about recognising that our current system is not consistently enabling relational support to happen. There are different ways that it could be strengthened, I believe. This could be in creating more time and continuity within existing roles, strengthening training in relational and trauma-informed practice, improving integration between our services, and where appropriate, exploring the possibility of models that would enhance relational continuity within the workforce. But the core issue is ensuring that families experience consistent relational support, and at present, too often they don't. I appreciate that the question for yourselves as a committee is what can be done with this. Based on the research, and only that from what I can go off, I would suggest that 3 areas could be helpful for you to consider. First, to shape the early learning and childcare strategy so that it is not majority focused on childcare provision, but clearly recognises early learning, family support and relational development as also core educational foundations. Because education in the early years doesn't begin at the classroom door, it begins in our relationships, in our homes, and in the earliest interactions between parents and their children. Second, to advocate for stronger integration between education and health, ensuring that early intervention is delivered through partnership rather than separation. And third, to ensure that existing and future investment is focused not only on expanding services here, but on sustaining quality and continuity within the workforce. This is not about addressing or adding additional pressure to the system. It's about using the system more effectively. If families receive support earlier and in a way that is relational and consistent, it is more likely that they would seek help sooner. It could be more likely that they will be less likely to reach crisis points, and they could be less reliant then on more intensive services later. This is about shifting from a reactive response where we currently sit to preventative support. So to conclude, we already have many of the right services here, and we have a highly skilled workforce if we can continue to maintain them. But without relational continuity, families are navigating these services in a fragmented way. If we want better outcomes for children, I believe we need to support families earlier, more consistently, and through relationships, not just services. And the strategy that we are looking at current time presents a real opportunity for us to begin to do that. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. I wanted to start linking it into the early learning and childcare strategy, and one of the areas that I think was anticipated in that was around the development of a 2-year-olds programme, specifically around that very targeted support for that age cohort, as you say, before they arrive at the door of a classroom. And it's framed in the strategy as I think it's not really referred to as a programme now. It's about progressively extending developmental support for this age cohort, which I would have a slight concern is a bit diluted potentially from what we had hoped. How important would you say it is to actually roll out a specific targeted programme for 2-year-olds that would specifically target learning and development with that relational focus that you've highlighted before they would get to their preschool year?
I mean, this particular research doesn't speak to that specifically, but I do think, from my experience and from that early years background, I do think as much target as we can give to that under 3, particularly that 2-year-old, time for development and learning is vital, yes, and any way that it can be strengthened within any strategy that we have would be welcomed without doubt. I have nothing other than experience to back that up, currently from today, just looking at the areas I focused on with the research. But I think it's definitely something that we should consistently be, encouraging and thinking about.
And you'd referenced from your research specifically that parents often feel that the provision is patchy. It can be very dependent on where they live or what their postcode lottery is often referred to in terms of access to those services, maybe a bit of an urban-rural divide as well. Yeah. If we were moving towards a programme like that, or for early year services in general, how would you suggest they could be better targeted to try and get over that postcode lottery that you've highlighted?
I mean, I do believe it's so important to think about our most in-need families, without doubt. And, so, you know, the approach we've had with that, you know, thinking about socially deprived areas has been an effective one. And, you know, there's many families who I, you know, maybe don't know personally through the research, but I had probably identified a few within that parent cohort that I had who have benefited from that. But I think, you know, as time is progressing and society's changing around us and there's more pressures now, I don't think it is just those most disadvantaged that need that lifeline, you know, around them. And I think that's, you know, sometimes we maybe will pigeonhole ourselves too fully into that, and maybe it needs to be something more universal that everyone can feel a benefit for. I know that's not always an easy thing to achieve by any stretch, but you know, that's why I don't know a lot about that Finnish model, but it was one that came to my reading in the literature, and I thought, you know, I know we're not in Finland and we have very different setup here, but it shows that it is achievable in some ways to think about building that consistency, particularly in that earliest, you know, few years specifically. So yeah, I think we have to think about it on a way forward, because what we have now isn't really working for everyone, I suppose.
And again, when we have officials in, we can maybe pick up some of those issues around targeting and how they anticipate that's going to be done. I just really wanted to ask one other thing, and you specifically, you said in the 3 things, so what would we do with this? Yeah. And you talked about that integration between education and health. Yeah. And we hear it all the time, and we have a briefing coming after you from the early years panel from the National Association of Head Teachers, and they set out that feeling that despite for years this being discussed, they just don't feel that relationship is there between health. They feel they exist very much in isolation. So we hear a lot, and you're talking about a relational model, perhaps at health visitor level is an example of that, where developmental issues might be picked up with a child, or potential for additional needs. But yet we hear from then our early years practitioners at preschool level that information just does not seem to filter through to them in the way that they would like. So often they're coming in just with a complete blank canvas on day one. That, you know, there may have been a couple of kids identified, but they know straight away they can identify the children very quickly where there clearly are additional needs, and that hasn't flowed through. Would you have any suggestions or proposals how to get that integration right? Because if we develop that good relational model that you've set out through health structures, but it doesn't then filter through to those professionals in the education system to even benefit from the learnings from that, or and again, parents having to tell their stories twice, you mentioned that. Would you have any suggestions in that space? I
suppose if you could wave a magic wand, the ideal thing would be I don't think we need to change the way the health sector is making this. I suppose the reason my research focused in on, even though I'm very much education focused and early years focused, the reason I went down the avenue of looking at the practitioners who work within health was because they have a unique capacity to be universally with all parents of children under 3. And that's unique here. You know, there's no other real service that's doing that as consistently as them. But the kind of other side of the coin of that is that's very time consuming on that particular cohort of professionals, and they spoke very highly about that as being a real pressure. And you know, the number of those professionals I spoke to across that, and albeit quite a small sample, it was very rich in what they were able to share. And I think it probably would have been reflective. You can't generalise obviously qualitative research in that way, but I think it's probably a message that you would have heard more widely if I had have looked more widely also. But what I did find was that they want to do that relational side of their role, as well as that developmental check, that kind of leading parents in the right direction educationally and things. But I think their roles are just so thinly stretched currently, as are so many roles, I suppose, that they're not getting that relational time, and families still want it, you know. So I think probably, you know, it's hard to idolise some of these kind of expectations or recommendations, but certainly in my mind what came to the findings was, wouldn't it be great to have an early years professional, like a graduate, you know, the types of students we're putting out into the field ourselves in Stranmillis and other colleges, to build that relational element into their training, which we do already do in some form, but we could maybe strengthen that. That they would work alongside these health professionals. It wouldn't be a new role that makes them non-existent anymore by no stretch, because they do have that capacity to look at it from a health perspective and a development perspective that maybe an early years practitioner would come at it from a slightly different angle. But I think if we had some, when we look at the programmes that we do have out there in the likes of our Sure Starts and Home Start, I spoke to some of those stakeholders and they, speak so highly about what they can gain from those, in-home experiences with professionals. So I think I see it as like in an idealised way that maybe it would be a practitioner that works alongside in those first 3 years before school, that gives where the health format or cohort can't give the relational time, then this person can, and maybe that would be like the joining of the two services in some way. I mean, I wish I had it one to just do that. I don't know how easy that is from your perspectives, but maybe we can build something that works toward that, potentially.
Co-designing and co-commissioning services between health and education, it feels like we are a long way off that, but I think it's probably there's broad agreement it's where we maybe need to get to. No, that's great. Thank you for your answers there. I'll pass over to the Deputy Chair, and then we'll go from there to other members.
Thanks for coming in today, Aisling, and I just want to focus on the Irish medium sector, and there were new figures came out from the Department of Education recently. It shows there's been almost a 400% raise in the number of children in Irish medium education over the last 25 years. And I'm just wondering, do you have any assessment of the capacity within the Irish medium early years sector?
Again, personally, I don't really. It's not something I've specialised in or looked into. I know certainly there's probably other colleagues I have alongside me that would know a bit more about that, but to be honest, it's not something I know a lot about or have researched into. So I know that there is more of a kind of, you can feel the hearsay of kind of more of that kind of pull towards the Irish medium schools, but it wouldn't be something I have any expertise in, I'm afraid, to speak of today.
Okay, fair enough, and I understand that. If you don't know, you don't know, and that's fair enough, But Irish medium staff have raised concerns, particularly around the lack of wraparound support, and especially when it comes to children who have been raised with Irish as their first language. So have you any knowledge or awareness of the number of allied health professionals, particularly in speech and language, who would have Irish language?
Again, would be something I would know about. I'm really sorry. It's just not an area that I would be able to come at you with any statistics on or anything like that, but I'm sure we could probably direct you to people who would be able to answer that or would definitely have touched on that.
Okay, well.
I'd be happy to kind of see if any of our colleagues would have, but it's not something that's my field at the moment.
Sure, no problem. And just finally, and I suppose you could make an educated guess on this, because if you have children who are in need of that extra support, particularly around speech and language, and who have Irish as their first language, but the support they're being given is from someone who speaks only English, that's bound to have an impact on the development of those children. Would you not agree with that?
Well, I would imagine so, and I suppose it goes across anyone with an additional language, because we know we have, it goes into that field of maybe where we have children coming with other home languages as well, but this is the home language of these children, and we're maybe not thinking about that more widely. Again, it's something I don't know of, but I know that, I would agree with you, that's definitely something that, to meet the needs of all children and families, we need to think about all of these different elements that we have at play in Northern Ireland.
And would you see that as a failing within the department in not providing that particular type of support?
I wouldn't be able to comment on that, but I suppose like if we're not thinking about the needs of all the families and the children in front of us, then we are putting ourselves in the position to maybe feel that way. But it wouldn't be something I could comment on with any clarity, because it's not an area I'm looking into currently. Okay,
well, thank you for that. And apologies, I have to nip out a couple of schools I have to go and speak to. So.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. Okay, Cathy, you'd indicated.
I'm sure. And first of all, apologies for my sneezing fit in the middle of your presentation. It was so interesting reading your research to see it, I suppose, from that different angle. I suppose we're always very focused on that infrastructure kind of piece as well. So to see it from that kind of more relationship angle was really interesting. And there's a couple of things I just want to pick out. Workforce. Every single time we speak to, and it's parents as well, parents included, but anybody within the sector, workforce is the single biggest issue that they face. And it was very interesting to hear you speaking about the kind of male workforce as well, because I was speaking to a male daycare provider very recently, and again around the strategy. And yes, while workforce is mentioned, there's a feeling out there that it's just mentioned. There's not really any outcomes. There's nothing timelined or costings or anything, or sense of direction as to where it would go. And you've stated as well, like, these are the relationships that these children are having from a very early age, who can very often identify issues very early on as well. And I was glad to hear you mention the Finnish model as well, because I think they're standout in how they have professionalised their early years workforce from birth, and that the focus is from birth. So I was just really keen to get, I suppose, a sort of an idea from you as to how we could strengthen that workforce, or what needs to be done to professionalise for training and career progression, so that we're not losing them to other sectors as well.
Yeah, I think we've really hit a critical time with it. I think it's always been something in the background of, that we've seen that separation. We've had that split system here between the statutory and, the non-statutory, so that's not a new story, and I'm sure all of you are well rehearsed on that. But I think what's changing now is what I mentioned in the piece today, just about how what's impacting the families in front of these professionals now is now impacting those professionals as well, and that's something that's a bit new than it was before. And I think certainly when I spoke to the stakeholders who are responsible for employing these people, for training them, for moving them into these roles, and building up their skills and their quality, they're finding that where they have been able to do that, and they've maybe had a certain pot of funding to do a very targeted programme that's been massively successful, like ones I mentioned there. It's just the fact that we then have created these really great skilled professionals who are really passionate. And I think the key thing here is passion. Maybe in any job, but particularly in a job where you are posed with looking after people's children, there's no more important thing than that, in my opinion. So I think it's thinking about, we have had opportunities and really good moments here of upskilling these staff, and then suddenly the funding is gone for that, or that pocket of time has passed. And yes, those parents and families that received that support really benefited, but then the next people don't. And I think what we need to do is try, I know it's down to like a budgetary thing, which I know is the elephant in the room of being the difficult thing to manage, and I have no expertise in that. But what I do think is that ultimately, I suppose where the strategy sits now, and it does, to give it definitely, it does mention the workforce. There is objectives around the workforce and increasing training and quality and professionalisation. And there's objectives and themes around that within the draft, so I've consulted on that as well. But I just fear that maybe it'll move out in there, and that'll become a bit of a footnote, or it'll not feel as strongly weighted as the kind of expansion of services, which are equally important too.
Can't do that without the workforce. Yeah.
And I just think it's hard to tell from the draft where that's going, and I suppose that's why it's important for me to come to see you today to try and say, well, can we keep those two things coming parallel with each other? Because I think if we don't have the strong workforce, and ultimately the early years workforce who are not working in our schools don't have the same professional status. Absolutely. And we know that, and I think, why do they not? Why can we not do something that moves that more quality with that? Because we know, and the science backs it up. I'm not the only person who has said this. It's that, neurologically, children will develop most rapidly in the first 3 years. So the professionals who work alongside them and the parents are the people who need that focus. And then they will benefit when they get into the schools, and we'll probably, see less problems as a result if we really focus on that first 3 years. And even before, we're talking about pregnancy as being important as well, as in educating our parents in pregnancy and giving them that support. We don't always do that consistently either. or we're losing some of that, I think. I mean, I experienced it myself quite recently, and it's kind of, you see how you don't see the same professionals, you don't see the same midwife, you don't see the same consultants, and it does impact, it massively does. So we need to feel like we're holding our parents up as well as our children, do you know, and I think that's where I'm coming from, really.
And I suppose you have mentioned it time and again around
Very final one there,
no,
Kathy.
right, around the Sure Start provision and you know, that wrap around with Home Start and things as well. I would be really keen to hear, there's so much I'm really keen to hear, but I'm really keen to hear around those families who, like you mentioned, it's a patchwork of services and trying to navigate your way through that. Sure Start, I suppose, is one of those that certainly is a postcode lottery, and unfortunately in the strategy we're not seeing the expansion of that. But you mentioned there about, and the question from the chair around the access to services for disadvantage, and it's maybe more widely felt now around the removal of the criteria for those from a socially disadvantaged background, and there's a lot of fear out there around this about the Minister's intention to remove that criteria and the impact that that's going to have on those most disadvantaged children. I'd just be really keen to get your view on that.
I mean, that's why I did say, you know, I think this is a bigger problem than our disadvantaged families, you know, when we think about targeting relational support in the first 3 years. But we can't just disregard our most disadvantaged families, and I would not sit here and ever try to think that we could do that. So I think it's trying to find a way that we hold both of those up. Do you know, I certainly don't have all of the answers to how we would do that, but I think if we kind of make it feel like we're losing sight of one or the other, then we're kind of sitting in a difficult place, I suppose.
Okay. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Kathy. Michelle, you'd indicated next.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Aisling. That was, like Kathy, I was like everybody, it's an interesting piece of research, and it's something I'd have an interest in what's going on in that space. One thing I've also been looking at quite a lot, and something I hear all the time from primary school and school leaders, is around early child development and school readiness. So school leaders will raise concerns around toileting, emotional regulation, speech and language, those kind of concerns as kids now come into preschool and nursery schools. Do you think those kind of issues stem in part, at least, from the kind of things that you're referencing in your research?
I mean, potentially, Michelle, I couldn't speak to that with any kind of evidence because I haven't looked at that specifically in the research, but I suppose what I have looked at in this particular study is that building of interactions between parent and child and attachment, essentially. The kind of theory base behind mine was attachment theory, but alongside ecological systems, so thinking about the systems around the families, not just the families and the children themselves. So there's something in there certainly that when those are not as well supported as they could, maybe it is an education piece of, are we educating our parents well enough to know, you know, how to provide the best opportunities for their children in those first few years. And then, you know, I think probably what you're saying there about there maybe is some correlation between what's happened with COVID and a lot of what we're seeing now with children impacted socially but also physically in their development. And, you know, again, I don't have the evidence to say that that's definitely true, but I know there is evidence out there that speaks to that. But yeah, I would say from my experience and from the people I spoke to, I think there is something there that if we are kind of putting that safety net or that security around our parents and our children, we might find ways to support those issues and, you know, level them out better than we're seeing when we're coming into our schools. But again, it's not something I've got evidence on at the moment, so I suppose it's my own thought.
Yeah. So just leading on from that, you had referenced health visitors. So again, linking to that, the work that I'm doing around this kind of topic, I've been looking at some of the data around health visitors and those kind of 1 year health reviews. And it's they're concerning numbers. Like there's 1,467 cases of no contact, and that 1 year health review in 24-25, and 25% of those were also late contact. So you talked about health visitors wanting to do more of the relational side of their role. Do you think if we'd had more health visitors, it would go a long way to just resolving a lot of this? They would catch these things early, could pick up those parental problems, etc.
I think so, definitely. Do you know, I'm aware of those statistics as well, and in the broader kind of UK context as well as Northern Ireland, it's an issue. But I think that is part of what this, you know, I suppose my skill set is in the workforce of early years sector specifically and not health, but I thought it was important to focus in on who is universally accessing our parents at the minute and our children at that age, outside of the other services like daycare and Sure Starts and other programmes. And I think you couldn't ignore that relationship that's built between health visitors particularly, but you know, as I said, from being a parent who's just experienced those 3 years, it is definitely fragmented. I can't speak to what it was like previously, but I think the number is dwindling and the kind of access point is getting wider, the gaps there. And I think that is ultimately a workforce problem. I know that some of the health visitors I spoke to did talk about, you know, the more experienced colleagues moving out of the field, and there's not kind of the same intake of new professionals coming in. So that was a concern that they did raise, and I don't know, you know, they certainly are a more professionalised workforce than some of our early years practitioners, so I don't know where the problem sits there, and again, I haven't delved into that in this research, but I think certainly we do need to get that back to a much better statistic level.
Giving you lots of places to take your research next, aren't we?
Keep me busy. Another PhD.
Is there time for one more?
Yeah.
So again, you've talked about, and I think it's from your focus groups as well, but you've talked today as well about the kind of family support as well. So in your focus groups, it referenced kind of family circles, talked about siblings, parents. Mm-hmm. Is there a sense that those kind of networks now have become less common or less strong within communities? If you think about, there's less social housing, people maybe have to move away from their family to get housed, and then it kind of breaks those connections. How impactful is that in terms of these issues relative to just, we talk about services and those kind of interventions, but I think the family support networks sit alongside that in a really important way.
And that did come out, I suppose, in the briefing I gave you just this morning, or earlier, sorry. I couldn't cover all of those things, I suppose, but the wider research which you can have a closer look at does, some parents did speak about that, as in that they really do rely on those family networks certainly, and peers and things like that as well. And some, I suppose I couldn't comment totally on whether it's an impact of, you know, where people are housed and things like that. They didn't really go into that detail, but they did certainly talk about, you know, the isolation that can be felt sometimes, specifically about where you are placed and whether you are close to family or not. But I think what they also did say is that sometimes they were relying on those peer networks and family where there was the absence of other services, and vice versa. Sometimes there was the absence of the family and maybe more engagement with services, but really I suppose we want, you know, I talked about that village around the family, and I think that's part of the village. It's not just the services, it's the support around them, it's the peers. But I think what did come out, and I'll say briefly, sorry, I know we're on a time scale, but we talked quite a lot within the focus groups about social media and its impacts, and how there's some positivity around that, because that's where parents will go to when they can't access a GP or they can't access another service at that time. And we know about long waiting lists for things like mental health support, and they were really finding those to be lifelines in a lot of ways. But also what the fear there, and for me to reflect and discuss that and analyse it, was that, well, sometimes there might be misinformation in those contexts as well, particularly on social media. And some of the stakeholders talked about that kind of sense of expectation, and what people put on social media is really not reality, and it's building quite a difficult picture to navigate, I suppose. But yeah, certainly. Those
really interesting. I believe you ended on social media. We could have went into a whole thing there, but listen, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Have to move on to the next member, who's David indicated.
Thanks very much, Chair. I've just a couple of, I think, fairly simple questions in terms of just building my own knowledge around this. You first of all, I think the what you'd said around health and education and the need to try and obviously budgets are issues, and that's been an obstacle, but them working together, I think, is something that's been shared across this committee throughout my time here. But I wanted to touch on what you said around fathers being underrepresented in service design, and you've covered some of it in your presentation, but maybe if you could talk to what the reasons for that is. Is this because fathers are more difficult to engage with, or aren't stepping forward in the same way? Is it because of a legacy sort of culture in terms of our policy and our institutions in that way? What do you think is the main blockage to fathers being appropriately represented within our service design?
Yeah, again, it wasn't the sole focus of this study by any means, but it kind of naturally came up in discussions across the 3 data sets that I spoke to you about, the parents and the stakeholders and the professionals. And I think for that reason I wanted to identify it, because it can't really be ignored. You know, again, I wouldn't have all the answers to what you're asking, but certainly what this research was showing was that I think it's a combination of some of the things you mentioned there, as in still societally we still sort of place a lot of the emphasis on our mothers, you know, and we don't maybe do that with intention, but it just kind of naturally happens, and that might be something that is a societal change that has to take years to change. You know, I think we have made some stretches in that definitely over time, but I suppose, you know, from what people spoke about, and probably my own personal experience as well, is that still things are directed to you as the mum, you know, when you engage with like health services or other services. And, you know, I think that sometimes does make the dad feel like, oh, do I not have a say here, or do I not have a position to speak or be heard, I suppose. Particularly in like the likes of health visiting, where we tend to see that it is the mum that engages with the health visitor. Now, it's not to say no dads do, but
particularly in the modern era where you have many different kinds of families as well, and different kinds of family.
I mean,
makeups.
yes, we may not have a father alongside every mother also, so that's certainly a difference too. But you know, and again, we could go into kind of same-sex couples and things like that, and there would be obviously disparities across all of that. Again, I can't speak to any of that really on this research, but I think what's happening really is that we still have to do some work around that, and I think we had some services here that were really targeting that with, you know, making dads feel more involved. What it essentially...
Speak to how they were doing that. What does it you think was...
You know, I think it was like, well, Parent and NI would be one that I had experience of, I suppose, and I'm sure there's others out there that I just wouldn't be as knowledgeable on, but they were, you know, encouraging dads to come together in groups of dads, like we would see the likes of parent and toddler groups or mums and babies groups, which they are probably more likely to be known as, but we try to move towards parent and toddler to encourage that sense of, if you parent this child, you are welcome. But we still don't see a lot of it. We do see some dads. You know, one of the stakeholders I spoke to did a lot of work with Sure Start, and he spoke about that quite strongly, being a male himself, because he said, you know, we are starting to see more dads now, because we are seeing the context change around shift work and things like that, where mum might be working during the day, and actually we're starting to see dads come to mums and baby groups, you know, or parent and baby groups and baby massage classes and those kind of real key bonding times in the early years, and that's great. But I don't think we are really flying the flag for that as much as we could. And I think that probably sits across both health and education, in the sense that, you know, maybe it is our kind of structures that have been in place for so long around how we meet, you know, antenatal care and prenatal care.
Almost changing the impulse that we all have.
Yeah.
You automatically go to the mum. And all that,
but
and
like
all
we
get
know
that.
how high the mental health risk is for both mums and dads, and really the equal parent is not
on mental
happening.
health, but sorry, if it's time for one final one, which was just again to build my own understanding of this, that you talked about the importance of infant mental health, and could I ask you just to colour for me what that looks like, what kind of issues that are generally being dealt with and how they're being dealt with in terms of infant mental health, particularly at that very young age?
Yeah, again, it's something I've only been able to like dip my toe in with this particular research, but I know there's lots of work being done around that in other, you know, by other colleagues of mine even within Stranmillis and other sectors. But I think, you know, there was that term that surely infants couldn't have mental health difficulty. We probably would have thought that a number of years back. And
maybe we can all imagine traumatic circumstances that may impact, and trying to see how that manifests itself at such a young age, for me as a layman, it's confusing.
I mean, again, I wouldn't know every way it could show, but I suppose it's sometimes maybe that misconception that it would have to be something that's particularly traumatic, and yes, we will see infant mental health difficulties from those experiences, but we'll also see it from, you know, maybe less quality parent-child interactions in those first years. So it might display like some of the things maybe that Michelle highlighted there, you know, where we start to see difficulties with where children are developmentally, socially and emotionally. Some of the, you mentioned about toileting difficulties with children coming into schools, and a lot of that is around social and emotional difficulty. Again, I'm no expert on this, but you know, certainly if we feel that our parents aren't being held up to feel supported and to know how to bond with their children, then some of these impacting factors might show in those types of ways, or in, you know, withdrawal within the school setting or in the wider social circles. Again, that's only a few things that are potential. I'm no expert on infant mental health, but I know it's something that we're facing and we need to think about.
More expert than me, so thank you for your insight. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, David. John, you'd indicated next.
Yeah, thanks for that. You state in your evidence set against the backdrop of pandemic recovery and chronic underfunding of parent and infant focused services. The findings underscore, and just quoting directly, a widening gap between policy rhetoric and on the ground realities. Would you agree that in Northern Ireland childcare should be and children should be our number one priority?
I mean, I'm always going to fly that flag because that's what I'm passionate about. But yes, I think it's a good start to lots of other things that come after, isn't it? So I think if we can get stronger systems around those first initial years, we would see, you know, there's a highly good chance that we would see differences in how that impacts down into youth services, down into everything that follows after that, schooling. Again, I can't speak, you know, completely with authority on that, but I think personally, if you're asking from a personal opinion, without doubt, it's an area that I think we can't underestimate the importance of.
Okay, 3 questions, so I'll just move on. Thanks for that. In terms of health visitors, I've heard this, and we've heard this from parents, that health visitors often tend to withdraw support from those who appear to be managing well.
Yeah.
And then they feel left on their own. Is it fair to say that all parents should have access to more support ongoing?
I would say so. I mean, that was part of why, you know, I suppose it's no disrespect to that profession. I think obviously it's a lot to do with caseload, and it's to do with managing a caseload, and I know that's a real issue for that particular profession and others. So I suppose sometimes it is about a level of need when we look at a lot of things. That reflects
prioritising triage,
but I think, yes, ultimately we do have to prioritise people who are in most need and are at risk. But I think in an ideal world, could we find a way that we would have that net underneath all of our families universally? You know, we have that universal service to be there, and maybe in part it's not being there as consistently as it could be, but it is something that's already existing. So it's about strengthening it, maybe.
2 more things. One is really, really important in my view, is about childcare and pay. You mentioned in your evidence the need for improved pay structures in childcare. Now, my concern is, how do we deliver this without it just causing an inflationary price? Because whenever we give more support, it tends to be that the providers just up their fees, and therefore it just becomes inflationary, and the actual parent doesn't get any benefit. So how do we square that circle?
Wish I knew. I mean, again, financially and financial elements of it aren't my expertise, but I think I don't know the answers to that specifically. I just know what I can see from the lived experience that's been talked about within the research, and suppose my own experience of being in that workforce and being a parent. But I think you're absolutely right. You know, the subsidiary scheme came in and made a difference there to allow access to services, which is needed. But as you say, sometimes that just moves the difficulty up somewhere else, where we get inflation in what the price is. And again, I don't know the answer to that, but I think if we can prioritise making that really important network of professionals more inclined to move into that sector, maybe somewhere along that, when that all can level itself out, it will impact more positively on the providers themselves. And
the last one is a tricky one. I'm in maybe schools twice a week. Teachers tell me in primary school, so the people who go through the sort of the early year stuff and then are in P1 and P2 are behind, and these are teachers who have been in schools for 25 years. They're saying increasingly I see children behind key milestones, increasingly with some behavioural difficulties, not the child's fault, and struggling with things like the normal amount, unable to cope if they don't have instant access given to a device, and often become dysregulated. Often they can actually end up quite violent towards a teacher. And I've heard this on about 3 occasions, that the parent will then be called into the school and they'll say, how do you stop your child behaving like this? We just give them the iPad. We just give them the device. I see a problem in some parenting.
Yeah.
Of course, there are very, very good parents out there, but we are seeing a developing issue here about young people being behind milestones, being addicted to screens at a very young age, and a different style of parenting. Is there anything you're picking up on that, or any interventions we should be making?
Well, nothing.
I don't think I'm imagining this, because I'm getting this
Yeah.
consistently from professionals.
No, yeah, and I mean, I would have seen evidence of that, I suppose, in practice too. You know, I still was involved until very recently in quality improvement work, you know, as a specialist. And there is difficulty with that, and I think it is down to maybe, you know, more use of technology for, you know, maybe not the greater good for that use. But again, our world is moving in that direction, and children automatically use those devices and know how to use them. And to a point, again, I didn't look at this specifically and I couldn't comment with any certainty, but I think back to what I can comment on is that sense of attachment and building relationships. And maybe, you know, again, it would be unfair of me to comment on how parents will parent, but if they had more relational support around how to bond more effectively or how to interact better, where we didn't rely on a device potentially, but we knew mechanisms and ways to be more visible to our children, then maybe some of those things could be alleviated and potentially be seeing them when we move into the schools. Again, that's really hard for me to comment on without any, you know, knowledge of it, but I suppose if you're asking me from that perspective, where I could personally see the difference, I think it does speak to this research, as in if we're building better education with our parents when they maybe need it in those first few years, that might go some way to help that.
Just one thing, my heart breaks when I'm told directly from teachers that they see children who are in nappies,
Yeah.
in P1, but are very good at using a device.
Yeah.
To me, that is a fundamental challenge of our time that I still don't believe we're gripping decisively, and it worries me greatly. I think it's should keep us all awake at night.
Okay, thank you, John. Peter, you'd indicated next.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you, Aisling. Look, the recommendations that you made are really good. I was really happy to read the report, and it's really, really excellent. I think the first 1,000 days are absolutely mission critical to a child's development. From memory, you're talking about, I think, baby's brain gets twice as big in the first year of development, forming millions of neurons every minute. I mean, I'm wondering, I've got a wee thing I want to read out to you just from the report. Position within early childhood services, relational practitioners could work alongside health visitors, midwives, community services to provide sustained relational support to families during the early years. I suppose the first question I want to ask is that relationship between health and education. So actually up to really age 3, certainly within the first 1,000 days, it's mainly health in Northern Ireland. You know, in terms of the support, and I know that it starts to straddle at age 3 and move more towards education. But actually, a lot of what you are talking about is within, especially if you go through the first 1,000 days, is actually a health thing. So I suppose the first question is, what's your analysis of the implications of health and education sort of working together? Did you find that most of the research you were doing, and it was health contacts you were making, or the parents were making, rather than educational contacts?
Yeah, I suppose, I mean, the reason for me looking at those health professionals that I did, as I said, was really about them being that universal point. But it was just interesting to look at them as a cohort to see, well, how well supportive can they be in that time frame for parents, you know. And I think what you do find is that because it is a health-based role, as you say, it becomes very health-focused, as in checking for developmental difficulty or delay, and there really isn't that time for, you know, there probably is definitely element of relational support, and like some of those practitioners spoke very widely about how well they have built relationships, and it's fantastic to hear. But these are like one person here and one person there, and it's not something that can be consistent. You know, so yes, I know what you're saying, as in maybe like, is this more of a health thing to think about, and I don't think it is. I think it's so important for education, because I think we do still need those health professionals who have the expertise in looking for, you know, the developmental things that we're going to be thinking about with our children as they grow in those first few years. But what the education side can bring is we can bring the understanding of wider elements of that development, as in how the child interacts, how the parent responds. Those are things that I think sometimes the health visitor isn't getting the chance to do. So that's where I'm saying we don't discard what we have within health, we strengthen it by, you know, putting education up beside it, I suppose is what I'm saying. And you know, I don't have all the answers for how to do that, but you know, when you look at a piece of research, you're very much coming at it from this would be great if. But you know, I definitely think it's not just a health thing. It should be something that we're both trying to play as closely together as we can.
No, look, I don't disagree. I think you picked up on my point. With really, actually, in terms of statutory stuff, as it stands, it's mainly a health thing. At that age, you're talking about for 1,000 days, where you obviously have the midwife visits and you have the health visitors, and those health visits are really important because they can flag up, you know, child developmental problems and so forth, and support can be put in place from therein. In terms of just picking up on just some other questions that people had, I mean, we are seeing a significant increase in terms of special educational needs in Northern Ireland, and statements are obviously going up, but also the recognition that the needs are increasing significantly. Is there any correlation between, in your view, between the sort of first 1,000 days of a child's life and whatever support is currently in place, and an increase in SEN? I mean, I'm thinking in particular of, John was sort of touching on there with just making parents more aware. I don't know if this is, again, I'm going to go back, it's kind of it is a health education thing, it's probably a PHA thing, but just making parents aware of how important that first 1,000 days is. I was just talking to somebody last week, and they said they walk around Sainsbury's with their kid is about 1.5 years, and they just chat to the child in the trolley like it's a normal person. And I said, that's amazing. That's exactly what you should be doing. Just chat away. And she said, I'm sure people around me think I'm absolutely boogly. You know, here's me chatting to a child who's 1.5, he doesn't understand, isn't talking back to me. I said, no, that's amazing. That's exactly what you need to do, because that is actually having a significant effect on that child's brain. So I wonder, do you see any relationships there? It's maybe not unfair to ask you the question, but I mean, we're doing a SEN inquiry. Are the first 1,000 days important in terms, how important are they in terms of child development? Let me frame it that way.
Massively. Do you know, like, it can't be underestimated how important it is, and I think what you're raising there is about those effective interactions that you can just do in
that are free,
in
don't
the
cost
trolley.
anything.
Do you know, and you can do, you know, even things like, I remember reading something about the fact that all of our pram manufacturers have now started to turn children outward facing. So you go for a walk with your pram and your child looks out that way and you are behind. And you know, even something as simple as that is sending a message that it's not important to make eye contact with your child, to have those wee babblings. It doesn't matter that they're 6 months or 1 or whatever age they are. It's the interaction, it's the seeing your face, it's the responding to you. And there's lots of scientific, you know, evidence around that how important those interactions are. And I think there is a big part in this that there's a lot of our parents that don't know how to do those things, or that it's one of those things, I suppose it can be comparable to, you know, knowing how to play with your child. And a lot of people will say, well, I'm not really sure how I play, or like, you know, and then we also get people who are like, you work in early years, you just play with kids. And it's like, no, but there's so much to play. And I think sometimes we miss the mark to show parents how to effectively play and engage. You know, play is about lots more things than just having something to play with or to use. It's about you're the play resource as a parent. So I think we have parents who know about that well and who've maybe modelled it from other people in their families or their lives. And we have parents who maybe haven't had that experience, weren't played with in that way as a child or interacted with strongly, so therefore that cycle just continues. And I think that's part of maybe what John was raising there, as in that we're starting to see that difference in regards to SEN, that's a difficult one to say as in whether we improve those things we wouldn't get as much SEN. I definitely couldn't comment on whether that would be the case. I think that's something that is a developmental thing beyond what I have looked at, certainly. But what I can speak to is when I managed and worked within daycares for quite a bit of my career in early years, I know that we're very under-supported in that sector for identifying SEN, and I'm sure you know that. So there's maybe a piece for both of those there, but again, we'll need another day to talk about it.
No, absolutely fine. And look, thank you. Really brilliant research and good policy recommendations. It's a really key area. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you for your evidence today. I think we've got some material there that probably will feed into our SEN inquiry, and I think that lack of maybe focus in the SEN reform agenda around the early years is something that has been coming through in our inquiry, that it feels very school focused. And perhaps
I would say as well, teacher, that I have a number of other colleagues who are working within Queen's currently researching in Stranmillis that are looking at this, not the three sectors specifically. So there's lots more we could share in that sense.
That's very much appreciated. Look, thank you for your time.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay, members. So, thanks. I'm not aware of any issues I think that are needing specific follow-up, other than perhaps to note potentially for early learning and childcare strategy briefing and potentially for feeding into recommendations to the SEN inquiry. So on that basis then, if we're agreed, we can move on to the next item in the agenda, which is item 7. And if the witnesses are ready, that is an oral briefing from the NAHT Early Years panel, National Association of Head Teachers, and it is in relation to early intervention for nursery and early years, so very much following on the same theme, and this will be very much SEN focused for members' reference. So just while the witnesses are coming through, we have a briefing note from the Clerk at page 37. We have the NAHT report on effective early intervention for nursery and early years at page 39, and then we have the NAHT briefing paper provided for today's session, which is at page 17 of your table papers. So I'll just let the witnesses get seated. Joining us today we have Clare Majury, National Executive Member from the National Association of Head Teachers, and Emma Corry, National Early Years Representative also from the NAHT. So you're both very welcome here today. I'm certainly looking forward to this evidence session, as I think there's some really great material here for us to think about, particularly in our SEN inquiry, and we haven't heard probably, I don't think, in terms of even from the EA and department's perspective, I don't think early years, preschool, nursery settings have come through as a very strong theme, and I think that probably should be of concern in terms of where we are with special educational needs. So I think hearing this perspective from your roles is really, really helpful and will hopefully help frame some recommendations in that space. So look, I'll not do any more preamble. Great to have you here. If you have any opening remarks or presentation you want to make, sort of up to 10 minutes to do that, and then we can move into question and answer from there. Okay.
Thank you. First of all, thank you very much for inviting us here today to speak to you. I'm Clare Majury. I'm the principal of Hollywood Nursery School. This is my colleague Emma Corry, who is the principal of Ballyclare Nursery School. And just to give you some idea of context, those are two of the larger nursery schools in Northern Ireland. Between us, we've had many years' experience as nursery principals, and we stopped counting the number of children we taught each when we hit 4 figures. So we have been at it for a very long time. And what we would like to do today is we would really like to bring the voice of the children into these discussions and bring the children's voices into educational planning. We've looked at the current provision and we drafted our solutions-based paper, because a lot of the things that are going on in education we don't think necessarily serve children and families particularly well. We've brought a copy for everyone, and we're going to talk today about the current situation, and then we're going to go through just some of the solutions that we would propose. Emma.
Thank you. So first of all, obviously we're here for the children. So I'd like to share with you just a small case study of a little one that I have in my nursery school this year. His mum's given me her full consent to share this with you because she is absolutely horrified and upset by the system as it is at the moment, and she was delighted that I was coming here today. So this little one appeared with us in September. He's non-verbal, he has physical challenges, and we have just managed to get him a buggy from the Majury Foundation because he walks to school with his mum and he just physically isn't able. He's not toilet trained, he's a sensory seeker, so often displays behaviours around those needs. We can't leave him unsupervised at all. For example, he will just flip himself into the water tray and lie in the water tray, things like that. And we also believe there are visual issues as well. So a big lot of need there. So he came to us, as I said, in September. And in consultation with his mum, she also has major concerns. We decided that he was too severe to follow the graduated response framework. And our understanding from the graduated response training was that any child that was very severe wouldn't need to go through that process. So we promptly made a request as a school for statutory assessment. We had a lot of our own evidence from what we were seeing in school, and we got a flat no back from the Education Authority. So we are only meeting his needs in school because we have a specialist provision that opened this year. But without a statement, he cannot be considered for a special school or specialist provision for P1. We are very different from the majority of nursery schools in Northern Ireland. We recently relocated 2 years ago to a refurbished building in Clare. We're very fortunate and we have a lot of space. We have a lot of equipment that I've managed to get for us over the years. As I say, we have our specialist provision, which is great. And I have a really highly skilled staff team and a specialist teacher. But most of the nursery schools in Northern Ireland don't have these provisions. And if this little boy had come through their doors in September, they would not have been able to meet his needs at all. Unfortunately, the Education Authority took none of this provision or what we're able to provide or what we're needing to do for this little one into account. They didn't see him. They didn't ask for any further information. It was just a flat no. And what makes me really sad is that whilst I can provide this for him in my school, most schools, nursery schools in Northern Ireland, wouldn't be in a position to do that. I'd also like to share with you some of my experiences in making requests for involvement around the LIT team. So again, we have many children with a high level of need. Now, the request for involvement involves a lot of administration, a lot of paperwork, and again, we got a lot of rejections. And in my school, we know that if we're asking for help and support, then these are a high level of need these children have got. The EA seem to want evidence that quite often isn't available, and our professional opinion does not seem to be taken into account unless it's backed up by maybe health reports, for example. But unfortunately, due to the issues within health at the moment, with waiting lists such as they are, we often don't have any medical evidence to support our concerns. And my fear every year is that I potentially cannot get a child the statement that they need to determine their P1 placement, and that they are failed by the system and have to go to a placement that is unsuitable for their needs.
So what we wanted to do, given that this is our current situation, was to look at some solutions. And the first thing we looked at was the statementing process. Now, as I know you're all aware, the statementing process takes a minimum of 26 weeks, and that's minimum. Children are in nursery school for 38 weeks, so a significant part of their time in nursery school is without any support. So this is what we would like to see instead. We would like to see an urgent and immediate response for children in crisis. For those with the highest level of need, those with multiple and complex needs, we'd like to see almost like a triage system in place for those children so that those with the highest level of need are fast-tracked. And we would also like that once the school has identified that support is required, that support should begin before the statement progresses. If we could get at the stage where the school has identified need, the psychologist has agreed, support should be put in place for that child. We shouldn't have to wait. Schools need much easier and faster access to educational psychology. Our educational psychologists are an absolutely vital resource, and in an ideal world, we would like to have them in our schools before the first half term to discuss any children that we may need to work with. We would also like to see a major reduction in the level of paperwork that educational psychologists have to complete. We want them to spend their time with the children. And we think that schools need to be appropriately funded to provide the support for the children that we have who come to us. And for those children for whom mainstream is really not the best place, where they're not able to cope, we need to have specialist provision that is ready to step in during their nursery year. We need to remove the set pathways to allow for immediate support for our most vulnerable children, and the graduated response framework is too prescriptive. It won't work for all the children that we have presenting in our nursery schools.
We'd also like to ask for you to think about the staffing that we have in nursery schools at the moment. So we were delighted that the DE introduced the Early Years Inclusion Fund, and this has gone some way to support us. However, we need to know that this is permanent funding, and we need to have enough funding to build a strong, well-trained and effective team. SEN isn't new, and we shouldn't be in an emergency response position every September. We should be well trained, well resourced and well prepared for the little people coming through our doors. Nurseries have a staffing ratio of 1 to 13. We would like to request that in order to bring us in line with the private and voluntary sector, who have a ratio of 1 to 8, that this is done as a matter of urgency. It's been identified within the early learning and childcare strategy, but however has not been identified as being looked at until 2030, and we really feel that this needs to be done as a matter of urgency because staff are probably the biggest resource in supporting us in the early years. This will impact approximately over 15,000 children per year in the next 4 years. So we'd really like to be able to get it right for those children.
And we've thought about the advantages of bringing the staffing levels into line across the sectors. Obviously, we want to move to the 1 to 8, which is the minimum standard that Health have identified. And the reason is quite simply it provides more support for children who arrive with any degree of special educational needs, those who arrive with English as an additional language, who come from a looked after family, all those situations. It gives us the ability to support those children without constantly looking for one-to-one assistance for a 1 year period. It would give us significantly less staff turnover. Staff are our most important resource, and we invest a lot of time and effort in training and developing their expertise, so we really need to be able to retain them. Currently, a lot of our nursery staff are on 10-month contracts. We employ them from September to June. Nobody will remain in a career where that is their term and condition of employment. We just can't keep experienced classroom assistants at the minute.
And finally, another point we'd like to consider is the deferral of P1 for some children, because transition can be a huge challenge for some of our children, and we really feel that it could have a real positive impact for parents if this had a wider criteria, because currently it's just by date of birth that this can be decided. For example, a looked after child who has suffered trauma and is demonstrating this in their behaviour may not have a special educational need, but still might require more support in a familiar environment before they are ready to go on to primary school to a more formal learning environment. And also we would like to see included within this criteria other things such as children who have suffered abuse, bereavement of a sibling or a parent, for example, or major illness within their childhood. All of these things can have a real impact on their learning, and we just feel that the nurseries are really well placed to be able to support them if that's what their parents should require.
So what are we asking you to bear in mind as you move forward with this today? What we would really like you to do is lobby the Minister, the Department of Education and the EA to bring in some of the things that we have suggested in our paper.
Mm-hmm. So firstly, we'd like to really get everybody around the table to talk about what early intervention truly actually means, because it is not an EA process. It's something that should be done within schools with the support, the staff, the resources, and we do need an outside team as well, ready to support without the administrative burden, and it needs to be personal for every child.
We also need a statementing process that actually supports children with the highest levels of need from the point that that need is identified. We need it to be easier for parents and schools to access, and we need easier and earlier access to educational psychology in every sector of education.
Going back to the structure, we would like to see a better child, parent and school-friendly early identification and support process with schools at the heart of the support. Then, maybe at an EA level, have support mechanisms put in place that have been designed by educators currently in child-facing roles, not bureaucrats or people who have no recent experience of working continuously with a set group of children.
And we would like, as we discussed, a review of staffing levels in nursery schools and units to bring them into line with the minimum standards identified by health. And we would like that to happen prior to 2030. It's just too far away. And we would also like a review of the career structure for our classroom assistants. It's a really skilled and valued workforce that impacts incredibly positively on our children. And we need to give them the terms and conditions and pay structure that is reflective of their important role.
And finally, as we discussed just now, to review and look at the wider criteria for deferral to P1. So Clare and I would like to thank you so much for listening to us. We would like to meet with you again to explore this maybe in the future, but are very happy to answer any questions you might have now. Thank you.
Thank you both. And look, your briefing was really comprehensive, so it is actually hard to know where to start because it is there is so much in there. I actually wanted just to pick up on something that I think came out from your oral evidence, perhaps even more than in the written briefing, and it's that connection between the statement and the placement. And really, from the minute that child comes in to a nursery or a preschool setting, the clock is ticking for their next transition. So if we don't have that right, they can end up then being extremely disadvantaged by the next move being the wrong one on the system. But you combine that with the messaging coming from the EA, which I understand to an extent that perhaps we do statement too quickly, or that we have too many statements, and that statementing is seen as a gold standard access to support that should be available in the system. But if the placement in the right place is connected to the statement, it becomes very important. So I wanted to just get an idea from your perspective. Do you think there is an argument that we could almost separate the placement from the statement in the early years setting to, really that it should be needs based rather than a statutory process? Would that be something you think is worth exploring?
Absolutely. So definitely, I think the reason everybody goes for the statement is because it is the only mechanism to make sure that child goes to the right place. And we would firmly believe that there's a much better way to look at the whole of the early years. And we don't just mean necessarily in nursery school, but up into foundation stage, because that whole, for the primary schools as well, it's still an issue ongoing for them. If we can get a lot of the provision right and a lot of the input of the children right, that really helps us to see what each child as an individual will really need. But we do need to have something in place. And in the olden days, we talk about this all the time, there was this assessment period where a child could go on to a specialist setting without a statement, and then it was maybe seen within there what was. So there's lots of different things that we have thought about that would work really, really well. But the problem is all the time that the statement is the only mechanism to get the child the setting that they need. That's why everybody is racing for that. Or if they're going to mainstream and they're going to need support, and a one-to-one and mainstream, again, that's the only way that it can be done at the moment.
No, that is helpful, and I think that's something that we haven't really explored, I think, in our inquiry, in terms of just that really the critical connection between statementing and placement in the early years, because we all know, even in primary, there is that sense of you don't get the support perhaps till the statement's in, but if we're placing children in correctly because a statutory process isn't moving quickly enough, that can't be good for children. So I wanted to ask just on that. You mentioned, and again, I want to make sure I get the terminology right, the SEN and Special Education Needs Inclusion Fund. Is that right? Have I got the term right?
The Early Years Inclusion Fund, yeah.
So am I right in saying, and there may be two different pots of money, but is that the money that is meant to be targeted towards children who haven't yet been statemented, but to put support in while you wait for that? Am I right in saying that runs to the end of this month?
That runs until the end of this month. The first year it ran, you were only eligible for it if you had a child whom you had started the statementing process for by around about November time. This year they just gave a certain amount per class, and it is absolutely invaluable. Both Emma and I have funded additional assistance. I'm putting in a sensory room. We're putting in things that will have real long-term impact on the children. And what is so good about that fund is it's not very prescriptive. We can look at the children we have that year and spend accordingly to meet the needs of that particular group.
So two things then, that's on one hand positive, because I think school leaders, preschool settings are always saying give us the flexibility to spend the money in the things that work for children, but the flip side to that is it's ending in a few days' time, and you may have staffing arrangements in place, interventions in place that could potentially be at risk. Does that make any sense to you, that would have a hard cut-off of the end of March just because of a budgetary cycle?
No.
Okay.
We would very like that to be continued funding. That's one of the issues in education, is you get funding and then it just doesn't renew. So it's very hard to make long-term plans, and working your staffing around the end of a financial year as opposed to an academic year is problematic.
Yeah, and look, it's always a challenge in education. I don't underestimate that disconnect between academic years and budgetary cycles and all of that is difficult, but I have to say I've been contacted by a lot of settings who are concerned of that cut-off at the end of March. It's just not coherent in an academic year that we should do that. I'll ask one other question. It's a broad one, so just to leave it with you at that, and then I'll open up to other members. I would say, and I mentioned this at the start of before you began your evidence, my sense, and I don't know how other members feel, but my sense from the evidence from EA and department up to now has been very school focused. So when we talk about LITS, it's very much about moving through that code of practice through a child's journey through primary school. And then we have the new model of support, which is out for consultation at the moment from the EA around what happens on the other side of a statement. Again, feels quite primary focused. And I'm just a little concerned that that phrase that is just bandied around, early intervention has become something of really just lip service, and I'm not seeing it come through really clearly in the SEND reform agenda. I understand budgets are limited. I just want to get your sense, how well is that balance being struck in terms of where interventions are being targeted in the system, of where they would have the most impact from your perspective?
The graduated response framework, and I can only talk from my own context, I have some children in my school that it's absolutely fine for, and they are children that will be going on to mainstream school, probably won't need a one-to-one, but will probably need some additional interventions to kind of get them where they need to be. For that, it's absolutely fine. But any children that are coming in, and the trouble is now, these children aren't being picked up by health. The little boy I was telling you about had not had one referral made by health whatsoever. We are not talking about children that maybe struggle a little bit with some learning or a little bit with sharing. We are talking about severe children. And doesn't seem to be any recognition of this. And I know when we sat in on the graduated response training that the graduated response wasn't designed for children of that level of need. However, they are in our schools and we have got to support them. And we have to know that we have got people there to back us up. And there are lots of ways that we really believe that how that could look, and there be some good models in other parts of the world that do that. So yes, that is not saying that the graduated response isn't necessarily a good thing for some children, but it's not going to be the answer for all the children.
No, yeah. Thank you. So open up to other members for indications. Yeah.
Sure, as well. Yeah.
Kathy?
Thanks very much, Chair. I had a meeting last week with a full room of nursery principals, and I walked out of it extremely angry, and I'm getting those anger levels are rising again, listening to you, because it seems to be time to gain that attitude towards the early year sector, that it's just the forgotten sector, when it should be the most important sector. This is the very beginning. The Chair mentioned it, we hear early intervention nearly every meeting that we have, and it's so frustrating that it just seems to be this buzzword that is used without the comprehension of what it actually means. So sorry on the rant there. I wanted to pick up on something you mentioned there around the educational psychologists. So to give you an example of what we listen to from the EA and the department, we raise the issue of educational psychologists. What we're told is that it's positive, it's the removal of a gateway, it's allowing more flexibility. You mentioned the paperwork that's involved. We're told, no, we've removed that bureaucracy, and there's less paperwork involved now. We are here, and we've heard from you, less children not getting the support and the interventions that they need. No, there are many more pupils, many more children who are getting the support that they need now, and honestly, this is the responses that we're receiving. Can you give us when department officials and the EA are coming in and telling us this, it's very difficult for us at times to go back and say, no, that's not the case. But from what I'm hearing from you guys, that's certainly not the case. That's not what you are experiencing.
No, it's getting, I mean, we have been very fortunate in that both Emma and I have worked with brilliant educational psychologists over the years. I mean, they are so good at their job and they give us such insight. And when I started in 2001 as a nursery principal, I just used to phone the psychologist and she came out and off we went. Now I have to phone her, then I have to book a consultation phone call. There are numerous sheets of paper where you basically rewrite the same thing about the child in a different format. It's becoming horrendous. It's horrendously difficult to get the psychologists out.
And just about the intervention, you're right, early intervention, that phrase is bandied about all the time. And I think it's quite simple. If you put the time and the effort and the resources in at the early years, that's going to have a really positive knock-on effect later in life. And you're not going to... So what happens is, for us, we know that our psychologists are run off their feet September, October, November, dealing with children transitioning up to post-primary. In my opinion, those children really should have been sorted out a long time ago. That shouldn't be an issue. It should be the children that are coming in now, if we can help them. But it's about having that continuity and that long-term plan for education. So it doesn't matter, who's making decisions, at any one time. This is the plan and this is what we stick to because we know this. And there's so much research that is either ignored or picked out from to suit different narratives and different policies, but actually there is really, really good research that shows if you do it early enough. And I know the lady before was presenting about 0 to 3, and we are a real firm believer that 0 to 6 is your crucial time. And there's a lot of work around brain development and things like that that would absolutely back all of that up. But it's about just getting it right and knowing what early intervention, and it's about the team around the child and having all those people that can make a difference there, not in 6 weeks or 8 weeks or 3 months or a year's time once you've got all your paperwork sorted out.
Or if you're turned down, having to do it all over again.
And having to prove, it should really be, this is what we need, and then actually if it works and actually we don't have to spend the time and the money that we thought, that's brilliant, but actually we need to make sure that every child that we think needs it gets the opportunity.
And it's a recognition of the workforce, that you guys are the first point of contact that many of these children are having in this type of setting. You see it day in, day out, you understand the implications, you understand the issues that there are, so why not put that trust in you guys that you can see this. I've so many things I need to move on. Nursery assistants, when we're having the conversation about classroom assistants, once again, nursery assistants are very often the forgotten cohort that are within those conversations. And we know that there's the consultations out at the minute on that. What would you guys like to see come out of that review, specifically for nursery assistants?
We would like to see additional nursery assistants, first of all, so as we have a cohesive staff team that we can take with us over the years. We would like to see proper training in place for nursery assistants. We would like to see a better rate of pay for nursery assistants. They're leaving us in their droves to work in retail and positions like that. We would just really like a real acknowledgement of the level of expertise that they have.
And currently there's a real anomaly as well, and I've tried to push this a little bit, and particularly because I've got a larger school, this happens probably more than it would maybe in a smaller nursery school. So we currently have 3 permanent nursery assistants who work with the teacher within the mainstream classrooms. And then we have a team of additional assistants who I try and keep every year because I know I'm going to need them and I don't want them to leave. But there's a real divide. So in order to keep them with me, I have to employ them as a nursery assistant. But then if we get a statement for a child, they change contracts to a one-to-one assistant. But because it's very complicated, because we are dual day, so I maybe will have one of my girls, for example, this year, in the morning she's paid as a nursery assistant because I'm paying her just to work in a class to support children, but in the afternoon she's a one-to-one, so she's on a different, so one contract's 52 weeks, one contract's 38 weeks. It's all different paying conditions, and what I think we'd really like to see is in the nursery sector one role. So that it doesn't matter whether they're working as a one-to-one, it doesn't matter whether the child's got a statement, it doesn't matter if they're working, that they are all paid the same, that they get a 52-week contract, and it's up to us how we use those staff. And if the statement brings the funding with it, then that's in the background. There must be some code we can put in that says it's being paid by the EA rather than the school. But it's so, the amount of paperwork just even around that, for my admin officer is immense.
The EA have sorted out all the paperwork. It's less paperwork now.
Have to just draw a line on that. But I think that's a final
really,
comment. But
really,
I think those issues around the classroom assistants in nursery are really key.
It's just really, again, from that meeting that had the nursery principal release, and from a union perspective, how critical that is. Can you give us sort of a brief view on where we're at?
We'll have to be brief. We'll have to be brief.
It's absolutely critical. We carry out all of the, if we just take the administration and ignore the fact that we have full-time teaching commitments and all the responsibilities that a class teacher has, but we have all the same administration level as any primary principal. And we have the additional complication that quite a lot of the roles fall on us as well. For example, in my school I am the SENCO, in my school I am the designated teacher, I am obviously secretary to the Board of Governors, and we only have 15 hours admin support, and you've got to manage a staff team, carry out your it's just it was brought in by Katrina Ruan years ago, and it was brought in an acknowledgement that it was for the well-being of teaching principals, and nursery principals were left out. And we continue, no matter how much we have fought and argued the case, that our job is the same. And we have actually had acknowledgement from the Department of Education that the job roles are identical. So why we are not allocated the release is a mystery.
We shall see what emerges from the workload review on that point, because I know it's been a vexed issue for a number of years. Michelle, you were next.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, ladies. So much. Like I'm trying to pick out the bits that you want to focus on. I'm going to start with one because it actually relates to a case in my constituency. So I think you've already touched on it, but just like to get your clarity on it. So you've referenced children getting support immediately based on the expertise of the staff, and not while they're going through the statement process. I think you referenced it, but just again to get your clarity in view, that would be equivalent then for when you've got a 26-week kind of process, if that then falls over the transition between nursery and P1, that the expertise of the staff to hold that child back should be something that comes into play rather than being forced to go through to P1. I have a child in that situation right now, and it feels nonsensical that judgment isn't just de facto acknowledged, and that child remains where everybody whose expertise and knowledge knows that's the best place for them to be.
Yeah. So that, I suppose, comes under a little bit about the deferral for P1. So it happens quite a lot to me every year. So you have children that you're in the process of maybe getting a statutory assessment, and you know that just another year with us, and the parents want that, but unless that statement's through, and it's very difficult to be able to navigate that, and that's why we would like to look at that criteria maybe being widened. If they do have a statement, they can defer, but it's like you say, the ones that are in the process. So again, it would be really good to review that criteria, and also the looked after children is a massive issue, because many of them that would be with us in their nursery year have got developmental delay, have got trauma, based behaviours, things like that, because of the nature of what they've experienced before. And that is all kind of part and parcel, but you might not necessarily be able to get a statement for that child, but we would really like to see that being taken into account as well.
So there's a piece of work there for us to kind of raise around that. I think that sounds very sensible. So linking from the previous briefing as well, and it's an area that I've an interest in around school readiness and early development. I think it's a sensitive issue. You have a section in your report on toileting, and I have no intention here of trying to sensationalise that or make crude assumptions about why kids are coming into school and that's being the case. So we're trying to, like, if we can, get some kind of evidence base around this and ask questions. First thing I'm just going to ask, though, is the links between education and health. Do you feel there is any work really going on to address this issue at the moment?
You're very much dependent on the area you're in and your relationship with the health visitors. In certain areas in my area, I've had quite a good health visiting team for a long time, but we still have the issues of school readiness. In other areas, the health visitors maybe change a lot and there isn't that link, or there's a lot of children. So, you know, links could really be improved.
And it's interesting, I was actually talking to somebody from the SARS team the other day, and I was trying to find out if there would be any children coming to our specialist provision. They have not one child coming to our specialist provision in September, and that concerns me greatly. Why are these children? Because they will come through my doors, but they won't have statements, and we'll be the one that puts that in place. Whereas in other areas, he told me another area, he had loads of children ready for the specialist, and that worries me, because I'm thinking, well, why in my area are these children not identified like that? So that's a big piece of work, and the 3+ reviews that go on.
My next
Again,
question.
sorry. Well, I just. Do you want me to just to say?
No, you carry on.
Okay. Just the timing of those, we believe, is too late. So if those children were seen prior to coming to nursery, so we discussed this as a committee not long ago, and everybody around the table at that time felt that they do the 2-year check and the 3-year check, and we'd said, look, we know it's issues with funding and all of that, but if they did a 2.5-year check, so in between the two, by then the child would be able to tell a lot from what you're seeing, and it would give health the chance to flag these things up prior, whereas they're coming in after we've already started anything that needs to be started. So to me, and for my school it takes them weeks, because we have over 156 children, so those health visitors are having to come in and meet with all these parents, and actually anything that's been flagged up has already been flagged up. So to me, it's the wrong time.
I think then the problem is it's not happening either. Like some of the data that we're getting, it's like, and again, trying to get evidence and data around these things rather than making assumptions about them. So 3+ reviews, 2,846 were not completed in 24-25. And if you look at the earlier ones, I said this in the last briefing, like in terms of 1-year health reviews, 1,467 of those had no contact and 25% were late contact. So that kind of overlap in terms of health and education and the needs of the kids, which has to be central to this. There's a massive disjointness there. This is not working. So again, do you have a specific proposal? Is there anything more you think you could do from the education side? Or is it really this needs to be better resourced, and health and education need to come together better to try and actually identify the needs of these kids? Because the fact that people are falling between the cracks because these two departments can't get their act together, it's just not serving the kids at all.
I think a big problem is within health is the waiting lists. Even if the health visitor does pick up on a child and they're referred to one of the multidisciplinary centres, it can take years. But I also think education misses a trick sometimes. We were talking about this recently. When people apply to nursery school, they go onto the EA portal and they get nothing back other than your child is going to school A. We feel that's a window for education to throw out toileting advice, milestone checklists, all sorts of things that particularly for, maybe a first-time parent or somebody who hasn't got a big extended family and is a little bit isolated, would find very reassuring and would signpost them and would maybe encourage them to come and talk to the schools earlier than the child starting in September.
You said in your report too about where there's no specific medical or special educational need has been identified, that schools could have the freedom to postpone admissions. I mean, that'd be quite a big change to the system, but again, I think the chair said at the start that needs-based kind of criteria. I mean, do you want to speak any bit more on that, or?
Just have to be brief to finish this.
Sorry, just
it just says here, where there's no specific medical or special educational need has been identified, schools should have the freedom to postpone a child's admission until such time as they do not require the kind of intimate care. I think that would be a big change to the system if kids
what
without
we
special
would-
educational needs.
What we would really like is actual guidance for schools from the Department of Education and the EA. Currently, we have a very mixed offering. Some schools will admit children who are not toilet trained, mine does, others do not, but there has to be some sort of uniformity.
Yeah.
And also, I don't think, I mean, I know in Wales they have introduced a system whereby children have to be toilet trained or come with medical information. But it's just an area that we think needs to be opened up and discussed.
Yeah.
We're not prescriptive in what is the best way forward, but we do need guidance, and it does need to be across the system.
Agree, and in a mature way and a kind of
Yes.
sensitive way. Absolutely. No, thank you very much. Appreciate that.
John, you'd indicated next.
Yeah, thanks. That was really useful. You state your evidence statements can be significantly delayed if reports are not submitted by health, etc., in a timely fashion. Would you agree with a compass now in SIMS being replaced? The time's come for a greater level of data sharing between health and education.
Well, we would quite like to be in SIMS. For
Yeah.
a start, our systems don't link into the SIMS system, so I don't know what a primary school actually
Replace
gets
those
to
SIMS,
see.
isn't it?
But it's not really. It's we're supposed to be coming on to C2K,
Yeah,
but we haven't fully come on, so we don't have the SIMS system that a primary school would have.
right.
So we don't really know what they see from health.
Unbelievable.
We're not on anything. So, say for example, during the open enrolment period, we have to manually download all the children that have and make our own spreadsheets and make
Yeah.
everything because we're not on any systems at all.
So the IT's out there, but you can't access it.
Yes. When it moves on to this new system, we are supposedly going on board, but the new system has been pushed back, as far as I know.
Yeah. I often wonder, we put man on the moon in 1969, but you've got access to stuff in one system that's held by the state, and you can't access it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's bonkers. Okay, thanks. We'll follow it up. Yeah, look, mainstream teachers, not just nursery, but also foundation stage, parents are expecting them to change their child's nappy.
Yeah.
I'm hearing this from directly. Look, how do we deal with this? I know Michelle says we've got to deal with this maturely. I don't know anyone who's not dealing with it maturely, but it needs dealt with. There's an issue here that is growing. What's your thoughts on that?
Again, I think it comes back to the fact that we need advice for parents given out at the point of application from the EA. There are lots of charities give really good toilet advice. Eric is one. And if you look at the Kindred Squared report, which is recent, which shows just how many children are now entering school not toilet trained. And the issue with that is it takes up an awful lot of staff time. Because obviously you're not going to have a child sitting, in a dirty nappy.
100%.
Of course not.
Yeah.
And we will, you will change them, and we will work with parents to help with toilet training. But I think there needs to be advice and support for parents, and that again is something that maybe should be coming from health.
And possibly goes back to the health visiting home visits, because I don't know, and I wouldn't like to guess, but I'm not sure now how much, in the olden days, as we've heard from parents, the health visitor would have gone in and said, this child needs to be toilet trained, and we're not sure now. There's loads of issues why that may be, if that's not happening. But again, I think it's about trying to get health and education together to discuss those things, particularly sort of the 0 to 3, 3 and 4, be a really useful discussion to have.
Well, we're in a society now that doesn't want to have honest conversations and challenge, and actually sometimes tough love and honest conversations are required. And that's a lot of politicians too. They don't want to discuss this. Okay, fine. One common complaint from teachers is some parents are increasingly becoming part of the problem. Some parents in schools. In some schools, I just read this carefully, I don't want to be misconstrued. Parents are given free rein to walk around the corridors, hang around the classroom door, often prolonging a child's emotional distress, much to the frustration of teachers. I mean, how do we re-establish those healthy boundaries in the school? We just say, now...
I would say that's up to the management of the school to decide how they're going to transition children into their buildings. I think COVID in the nursery sector taught us an awful lot. Clare and I were part of the kind of COVID review with ETI after, and there were a lot of lessons learned. And one of the things was there's always been that important relationship between schools and parents, and it's still as important today. But actually the things that I think a lot of us thought were important, maybe from COVID we learned that it wasn't necessarily how you did it, but that you did create those relationships. And it would have been in nursery schools, we would have had parents in, they would have made themselves tea, we would have had the parents' room, and maybe things like that could occur. But actually you can have just as good relationships, but just come about it in a different way. And I think, you know, it's up to schools, and my school came a long way with that now. And when we do our settling in now, we actually do acknowledge that with the parents, and we say to them, you know, children might find it really hard to settle if you're there. So this is what we do. Obviously, we're going to keep you informed every step of the way. And most parents actually really agree with that and like the way. But I think that's something for a school to decide. I don't know that that would be something that you could...
Yeah, I just see there is some abdication of responsibility at times from some parents towards teachers, and the teacher then gets landed with things that they're not actually the primary responsible for. Just ask one more question about staffing around special education needs. Many mainstream settings don't have the appropriate number of staff to meet the children with complex learning requirements. I haven't heard as much pushback on this from the unions since the pay award. Do you think there needs to be more discussion about this? Do you think it gets the attention it deserves? The imbalance between the number of staff and the number of children who have additional needs?
A brief response, but to try and address John's point.
I mean, possibly I wouldn't like to comment, but I would say that would be something that hopefully will be looked at as part of the classroom assistant review. I think they're looking at the whole issue around everything to do with classroom assistants, and I would suspect that children with SEN and that would come into that hopefully, but I wouldn't like to comment.
No. All right, well, thank you for your excellent contribution.
Thank you.
Thank you. Danny, you'd indicated.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you. It's been very informative. I want every child to have the same opportunities, and we hear early interventions a lot. One of my last visits to a nursery school, it was the conversations actually went down. We talked a lot about poverty, and we see the workload of what our teachers have to bring home. One thing probably not talked enough about is the support they're providing for some of the children who are coming in hungry and out of teachers' own pockets or principals' own pocket, providing breakfast and lunch and help for the after schools. What impact is that having on our young people going forward here to reach their full potentials?
Well, I mean, I think we all know that poverty is one of the biggest impacts on our children. You know, coming to school hungry, coming to school without a coat. I mean, we certainly in our schools, we all supply children with free uniform every year when we see there is a need. In my school, we have a stash of coats that have been donated by past parents that regularly go home with other families. Child poverty is just, it's very depressing that it's still occurring in a country like this in this day and age. It's very depressing that I have to direct some of my families to the local food bank. I mean, I don't really know what to say about it. I wish it was not the case.
Me too. And the impact of the increase in the school lunches at the minute as well, the impact that's having. Like myself, I'm bringing forward a private member's bill on ending holiday hunger, and I know it's not the silver bullet here, but it's one piece of a wider puzzle, and it'll support 80,000 children. But what we probably need to be talking about interventions is in the next piece of the puzzle to start happening, which will be that universal free school meals, even if it's that phased approach from nursery, P1, P2. We heard about the first 1,000 days, you're saying 0 to 6. How beneficial would something like that be to them for those children to reach their full potential right throughout their pathway of education?
Anything like that helps our poorest children would be hugely beneficial. Emma and I work with a neuroscientist. So we have done a lot of work looking into children's brain developments and all the things that impact negatively on them. And, you know, obviously adverse childhood trauma, the things that some of our children have to contend with have a long-lasting impact on where they will go in life and how they will cope with situations and whether or not the prison population rises. So we do think it's absolutely vital that we, you know, do focus on the early years. and making sure that all the children that come to our nursery schools get the best possible experience.
And whether that means the whole issue around nutrition and things like that, because obviously at the moment the standardisation stuff's coming through. My nursery school, we don't have dinners because we're all part-time, but our children all would get healthy snacks every day, and we've actually made that a really big part of our day, because we feel that to get them to sit around a table to eat is so important. So it's all about, I suppose, your whole school ethos and your curriculum, but I suppose anything again that's funded that enables us to do more of that could only be a positive thing. And I think it would affect all children, because I think people think about poverty as being a big issue, but actually there are a lot of children potentially out there who have got very busy working parents that maybe miss out on other things, not intentionally at all, but so I think anything like that benefits all children, no matter what their background and no matter where they're from.
It's always looked at how much something will cost, and it's not really looked at in a sense of what does it cost down the line of not doing it.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Danny and Peter. You'd indicated.
Great, thanks, Chair, and thanks for the evidence, and Clare this afternoon. Clare, just pick up. I thought the checklist thing that you mentioned the way through there, that whenever parents apply to nursery school, why can't? I'm sure maybe there's a reason for this. Why can't EA send something back in terms of call it a checklist? This is kind of what we hope for, and then some maybe signposting towards support services, and a lot of parents probably need that. That's fine, but I think given the context of where we are and some of the discussions we've had just about issues in this committee already, I think some support is necessary and really, really helpful. So I'm sort of wondering, I'm sure the committee would be more than happy if you put some thought into what would be best. You could either take this up with the EA or the department yourself, but what would be useful in terms of if there was that opportunity to send something at that point, what that would look like? I don't know whether you want to comment on that.
I think you can go to the very basic self-help skills, like children being able to feed themselves, put on their own coat, attend to their own needs in the toilet, clean themselves, wash their hands, blow their nose. Those are the very basic school readiness skills. And then if we look at things like toileting, there is a lot of help out there for parents, but they don't necessarily know where to go to find it. And it would be incredibly useful if those links were sort of universally shared.
Yep. And would you be sorry, go ahead.
And also additionally, things that you can do to just help your child. Like reducing screen time, introducing books to the home, lots of physical exercise, the importance of good nutrition, the fact that good nutrition doesn't have to be the most expensive meal, but getting the basics right would make a real difference to our children. So I think if we had some way to just share that with parents, we assume that everybody knows, but sometimes things aren't always obvious and you do need a little bit of guidance if a parent has tried something and got completely stuck. In that sort of early list that you gave, I mean,
you don't have to put a figure on it, but is the list that you gave initially, in terms of like putting on a coat, being able to eat, going to the toilet and so forth, some really basic stuff, I suppose. I mean, are you seeing within the sector, are you seeing lots of children presenting who aren't able to do those, don't have those skills at that age?
We're seeing a percentage who present in that way. It varies from year to year, and it would vary from area to area.
Did you say, sorry, I didn't catch, did you say huge or?
Oh no, I said a percentage.
A percentage, right, okay, sorry.
Not huge.
Not huge. Okay, no, look, that's fine. And in terms of some of the challenges that could be addressed with that, I mean, I did some research into this area, and you mentioned ACEs on the way through and trauma, and there's a whole catalogue of things. Attachment disorder is another one, and that's related to screen time. And I think some of these things really should be, I don't know how you do it and how you do it sensitively and how you do it well, and how much difference that would make, because you can only give good advice, even on this stuff that we've talked about. Say that package was developed and the EA had the capacity to send it out. Ultimately, it's up to the parents to look at that and go, yeah, you know, I'm going to try and reduce the screen time. I'm going to try and reduce the screen time my child sees. I'm going to try and sit with a ball and just push a ball to them and see if they push it back to me. You know, I suppose it's a frustration of mine that actually I think we have to do everything we can to support families, especially in those first 1,000 days.
Hear, hear.
Ultimately, I would just love then families or family units to take that and really put it in place, because as you just said, it is the most important time of our entire life, that first 1,000 days, and it doesn't have a conclusive effect on how a child will turn out, but it has a really, really exponential sort of component of that. So I think the checklist is brilliant. And look, if you get, maybe the committee will take that on and suggest that, and maybe suggest that you guys are a component part of that. I'd be really interested to see what the response from EA and the department is on that. I think that would be really, really useful, because I think what you've cited today is just mission critical to education. I know there's lots of things that are really important in education, but just what you've cited around that need at the first 1,000 days is really, really important. So I just want to get that on record. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Peter. David, you had indicated.
Thanks very much, Chair. And I guess what I'm going to touch on is between sort of Michelle's final question and what Peter said and some of what John said actually as well. So it's a similar area. I'm concerned, and it probably comes back to the toileting piece, that it again, and I'm not making a political point because it's culture beyond the current health minister, I think, but we know that the SEN crisis in our schools largely started with a failure of the Department of Health to bring together the information that was needed and pass that on to schools to know what was coming along the line. And this feels again like failure at the very earliest steps in terms of her ability to identify issues and developmental issues within our children, and work to, whether that's support for parents, whether that's some other intervention that needs to be taken. It's seeing that and knowing what the right intervention is and taking it. It just seems to me, again, we talk about things being cross-cutting. We talk about the Children's Services Cooperation Act, and I get it, and we have all supported that and argued for that. And I think many of us, myself included, have expressed concerns that health, for understandable at times budgetary reasons, I want to say that, have been more resistant to change and more dedicated to working in parallel rather than as one team than others. Are you seeing any work on the health side to address some of those issues that you're talking about?
We wouldn't really. I think, again, as Claire said earlier, it maybe depends on your regional area and where you are. Yeah. I think a lot of those things that you've mentioned, it's hard because the checklist, as you just said there, that's something I sort of would say and probably we would think could be done collaboratively with health. Is it something that needs to be done? We would probably argue yes, from a much younger age. It's almost now that, parents, through no fault of their own, do not know what developmental milestones are and what's expected of children at a certain age. And so we're seeing... I
would hesitate to say there, because I'm going to agree, I think, with John, actually, that it's important that we have the supports, parents are notified of them, but I don't think we can say through no fault of their own. I think there are times whenever we do need to have the tough discussions. We have to say there is an expectation in parenthood for some of those things. We need to support them. We need to inform them. No problem with a checklist coming from EA if that supports that. But I don't think we should just as easily say, I don't mean it as criticism to you, through no fault of their own. There is fault. There's failings on many parts here, but I think that there's personal responsibility has to come into it as well.
Well, whatever viewpoint I suppose everybody takes on that, but however, is there merit in looking at a 0 to 3 or a 0 to 6 strategy that really looks at these things and actually thinks, do you know what, we're going to take some of the money and we're going to put it here, as you were saying earlier, the investment, if it's made in those early years, we need to be confident and brave and say we're not going to see the benefits immediately, but we are going to see it when these little ones hit 18. Hopefully we will start to see the change. Society has taken a long time to change to how we are today, and I believe, and we would believe in education, I think that it's going to take a long time to be able to start to change some of those things again, but it starts with investment and confidence in the things that we know are right and the things that really, really need it. And that potentially could be, hopefully, health and education working more together going forward. But I suppose it's identifying how that could be done.
I think because we just have to look at, Michelle referred to it, that suggestion from yourselves that one of the steps that would be taken would be to delay someone's, a child's entry into the school in that regard. I mean, that worries me, you know, delaying a child's educational development because of other developmental issues that really should have been sorted before then. I think that's a really, really serious step. And I think we need to be honest about the impact of the lack of or the problems that you're being presented with on what they could lead to down the line. Because I think we talk about cross-cutting issues and departments working together. Increasingly, I think whenever we talk about that, when it relates to the Department of Health, what we're seeing is that health are expecting people to step into their space and take on roles that were traditionally theirs and take things off their hands. I think that's not what the Children's Services Cooperation Act is about. That's not joint working. That's abandoning the field to some degree, and I think we need to be open and honest about that. But I think we do need that support. I'm supportive of EA doing what they can to support, but I do think the Department of Health has to step up to the plate in recognising those issues and working to address them. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, David. You're getting off lightly here. Lots of long speeches and not many questions. Cara, your last indication.
Chair, apologies, ladies, that I wasn't here for your briefing. I was upstairs chatting with young people, but really appreciate your answers so far. I just want to pick up on Peter's point there about screen time. How often is that coming up in discussions that you're having, or when you're engaging with children in these really key developmental years? Is screen time a real concern for you? Is it something, and apologies if you've already answered this while I was out, but I'm just really intrigued to see how it's impacting the development of our children.
I think screen time it's all over the media, it's become a universal concern, not just children's time on screen, but parents' time on screen as well, which reduces those vital face-to-face interactions. Certainly in our nursery schools, we many years ago took a separate decision to step away from iPads in the classroom for the children's use, because I think they learn so much more from things where they don't get that automatic response. You know, we just can't swipe and get
instant gratification.
An instant gratification. But I think if you look at the science of it, language is decreasing and all sorts of things are decreasing. It's because of lack of interactions. The majority of parents are very sensible about screen time, but I do think it is very worthwhile to just make parents aware that excessive screen time is not good for your child.
I bet there's an element as well as monkey see, monkey do. Like if you see your parents on the phone all the time when you're a youngster, that becomes essentially normalised in the home. Do you think there's more the Department of Education can be doing to issue statements to parents to give guidance on screen time? Do you think there's any lack of communication there that could be improved?
There's quite a lot of resources for schools under the Getting Ready to Learn programme. So many of the nursery schools would now take part in different elements of that, and screen time certainly within the parent questionnaires and things that ask questions about that. Again, I suppose, as with all the health issues, you know, where does that fall? You know, is it education? Is it health? Is it, you know, I don't know who would take that on, but it's very, very difficult. And as Claire said, though, I think it's been something, particularly within a lot of the nursery schools, IT and tech was always a really big part of our curriculum, but certainly for many of us now, we've kind of almost stepped away from a lot of those things because children need to actually just learn and play and learn all of those personable skills. So it's probably because we know they're getting a lot of that from the home now. So it has had quite an impact on us, but in a different way.
Wow. Going kind of back to basics. I remember when I was in nursery school, we had leapfrogs, and that was about as sophisticated as the tech was back then. And just lastly then, similar in nature, I suppose, to Peter's question, just around the toilet training thing, do you think it's multifaceted? There's multiple reasons as to why we're seeing this, whether it's One end could be parental neglect, but maybe it's just, I don't know, a change in circumstances. Is it since COVID that you've seen this over the past number of years? Anything you can point to?
I think COVID definitely brought it to the fore, but I think it has been creeping up over the last 20 years, and there can be all sorts of reasons for it. And we see our role really as to support parents, to help them in toilet training their children. There's no judgment attached. Yeah. Some children find it easier than others. Some children have sort of gastric issues. There can be a multitude of reasons why children aren't toilet trained by the time they reach nursery school. But what we would like to do is find a constructive way of giving parents guidance and support to help them with that.
No, that's brilliant. And then just very quickly, in Transform Ed, one of the points that I had raised a number of weeks ago was point 8 of the 10-point plan is looking at educational disadvantage. I know in Northern Ireland particularly, a lot of our children are coming from very complex homes with a lot of trauma, whether it's domestic abuse, violence, addiction. I'm sure when you see these children at this young sort of developmental age, you might notice that, you might pick up on that. What help and support can be offered to those children through the early years aspect of things? Is there more we can be doing as political leaders, as people in this committee, to support those children from those homes?
Yes, and just before you came in, actually, we were talking about, the looked after children, particularly maybe that we would see who have suffered, a really sort of bad start in life for many reasons. And actually, the impact of trauma can often display kind of similar to other SEN behaviours and things like that. And actually, we had this discussion recently in my school about the fact that, yes, it could be because of that, it could be a special educational need, but actually it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things why the child is displaying in this way. It's how we support them. So actually it's all part and parcel of really effective early intervention. And that's what we need to really, really make sure that we are all able to offer. So, obviously, if it is trauma, you would take that into account, and there would be other things you put in place as well. But in terms of supporting the child with managing themselves and managing their own regulation, whatever is causing that dysregulation, they're going to need our help and support. And we need to be able to be in a place where we're able to offer that support to them immediately and not have to fill in many, many forms and ask for different people to come. We just need to be able to deal with it there and then and support them in a really kind and appropriate way.
Yeah, because all the science, all the research points to if you invest in those early years, you get the foundations of life, right? The health outcomes, the academic, everything at the other end of life, staying away from the, prison system, it all ties in with the development around those early years. So thank you so much, and I really appreciate it. I didn't get the chance to hear you, but thank you for sending over your stuff. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cara. John, you had indicated there, I wouldn't have time for a long contribution.
Very short. It was just to make that point. This has been going on, that's what I'm picking up, for 20 years. So it precedes, really any particular department. This is a society issue. We're seeing it right across the UK and Western Europe. And I also note, I agree with you, that getting information out there.
For a brief comment, John.
Is really, really useful. But also we need to understand that the problem is now worse than it was before we even had ways of digitally communicating and internet. So there is an underlying issue here around parental responsibility, a small number of parents, but I do agree that we should give them all that information. And see what you said about the nutrition, the screen time, proper play, reading
proper books. We'll have to bring you to a close, John.
Brilliant stuff.
We have rehearsed these issues already in the evidence section. I assumed you were coming in with an additional point. No, that is grand. Look, thank you for your evidence today. Huge amount of ground covered there. I think there's an awful lot in relation to special educational needs, and I did say that at the outset, that I think we just haven't, I don't think, had that come through strongly enough from the departmental and EA evidence. So I'm really grateful to you for that evidence today. I have no doubt we'll pick up on a lot of these issues. We have officials in on the early learning and childcare strategy, and again that early learning piece, we can't lose sight of it. So I've no doubt we will continue the engagement with you. So thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much. We have left some copies of our report.
Thank you so much. Brilliant.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
There's 5 things we're bringing.
While the witnesses are just making their way out. There are a number of issues were picked up there in the briefing, so it's just to identify anything that requires any particular follow-up. I appreciate some of this will just be noted for I'm having documents thrust in my face here. So some of these will be noted for the early learning and childcare strategy briefing, and also factored in for the SEN inquiry. Sorry, members, if I could just ask if we could have a wee bit of order. So in terms of actions arising, I had one that I wanted to propose. It is just around that early years inclusion fund and its cut-off point at the end of March. I do think in terms of continuity of provision for our nursery schools and our preschools, it doesn't make sense to me that some provision couldn't have been made to roll that to the end of the academic year. So I would like to suggest that we do write to the Minister to get some clarity on that. I don't know if there are any other actions arising. Kathy, you're indicating.
Just on that chart, yeah, I think we should. It seems to be like a running theme. It was the same with the subsidy scheme. We were sort of right down to the very wire and knowing if it was going to be extended or not. It's not just about this should be extended. This shouldn't be something
still
that's
no
just
clarity
for
on
the
Tiny Life, and that's exactly
yeah.
such a small sum of money, but such a critical early years intervention as well.
Yeah, so I think whilst it's the the academic year or the financial year, but it's also will this continue on as well.
I think I really appreciated how the witnesses began their evidence to say we are here for the children, and I don't think children are not particularly concerned about accounting years. They need their needs met to the end of their school year, and not at the end of March. Well, we understand budget cycles are difficult. That's not really on a 3 or 4 year old's radar. I don't think, David, you'd indicated.
Yeah, I don't think there's any harm in writing around the idea of a sort of EA sort of advice sheet being made up, maybe in collaboration with the Department of Health, to make sure that parents, as they're approaching the time whenever the children will be going to nursery school, so on, are advised of steps that they may wish or should be taken in that regard. So I think maybe the committee could write to say, from that evidence session, that's one recommendation that was coming through strongly.
Would members have a view in terms of whether that sits best with EA or department at the strategy level, in terms of whether that's an intervention, just to get a sense from members? Peter,
just on same point. I think we write probably to EA on that one, as they're the operational arm. I mean, you write to the department, I don't mind, but I think we'll probably get a response from EA, because they're the ones actually, in the context of what was being shared, they're the ones
managing the process.
They're managing the process. I think the wider point, actually, David's point is a very sound one. I made this point at the first session, that actually health in a statutory function more or less are responsible for kids up to 3, certainly up in the first 1,000 days, and then it starts to get a little bit more murky as health and education start to meld together. I think on that basis, maybe if we wrote to health, even to see what some of the resourcing was that health visitors are taking out, and some of the experiences, I think it would actually be quite interesting maybe to have a couple of health visitors in here from that section to have a chat about that sort of stuff. They're really key in that assessment at an early stage in terms of some of the SEN stuff we're looking at, but also in terms of just getting that information out that the ladies were talking about in terms of the checklist thing, would be my view. So
I think Michelle, your questions around the gaps in health visitor input in terms of the numbers that where no contact is made or where contact is made late, and all of that will have an impact then on that rollover into early years provision. I'm not sure in terms of evidence time how likely we'll be able to get health visitors in, although I think we're still toying with the idea of a concurrent committee meeting before the end of this session. I don't know how likely that is to be deliverable, but no, I would have
written evidence.
I would have no issue right into health on that. And I think what came through in that there are obviously issues around school readiness. I think it is important to remember. I think parenting's tough. It is tough, and there can be a whole range of reasons why that there may be issues with a child being ready for school. And I think it is important that we do acknowledge that it can be for a lot of reasons. Parents often feel overwhelmed and are bombarded by what they receive on their screen and don't know what good practice looks like, what the right developmental markers are. And I think we need to be incredibly hard at times, and I think we do need to be mindful of that. Any other actions arising from that briefing? plenty to take away for future evidence sessions, particularly on early years childcare and on SEN. And I would just want to highlight again for members, we have a final session coming from the department on some of the early intervention aspects of SEN, and then we will be bringing inquiry to a conclusion. So please do be really starting to think on a very focused way around recommendations. And I think some of the things we heard today in that evidence session may well draw out some quite practical interventions in the SEN space at the early years stage. Nothing else arising. If we're agreed to move on, then I'm going to suggest everyone's probably looking at a comfort break. Pat and Cara probably have had opportunity to
we were working.
we were working hard.
The grab an energy
But I
drink,
think
that was about it.
We'll take 5 minutes. We have two items to get through. Although item 9 on the agenda is probably not going to take a huge amount of time. But I'll take 5 minutes comfort break and we'll return. If we could just turn the live feed off.
Committee Room 29. Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, 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 Sound.
Okay, members, so that's the live feed back on. So the next item on our agenda is item 8, and that's an evidence session on the proposed committee bill to allow all pupils the choice to wear trousers, and it will be moving into consideration of drafting instructions as well as receiving some additional legal advice. So given that there'll be legal advice being discussed and the drafting instructions will be ironed out, I'm going to propose that we move into closed session if members are agreed. Agreed. So if we can move into closed session, please.
Committee Room 29, Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, Sound.
Okay, so that is us back into open session of the committee. So I'll just ask the clerk then to just walk us through what we've covered in that session.
So the committee received legal advice on the proposal of a religious exemption, which had come via correspondence from the Free Presbyterian Church. And then the committee also considered a set of drafting instructions for its committee bill. One of the members wants to make a declaration in regard to the exemption.
Yeah, just to say that a member of my wife's family would be employed by an arm of the Presbyterian Church.
And the decision of the committee was to not have a religious exemption. Did you want to say anything more about that as well?
Yeah, well, just to say we didn't push it to a vote, but our position, obviously there's things that would require greater scrutiny, but our position was we would prefer to have an exemption for to grant the request that was made of us, but recognise the will of the committee on that.
I'll concur with my colleague.
And then in respect of the drafting instructions, members discussed the most enforceable way to draft the bill and give that discretion to the drafter. There are obviously options to have a standalone bill bill or an amendment act to the 2026 Act, which has been given royal assent since the first instructions to our legal services. The committee also agreed that they would ask for provisions inclusive of sportswear and inclusive of nursery schools, and that commencement should be in the 2027 academic year, and that enforcement of the provisions would be via a standalone duty, as well as, depending on the vehicle, the legislative vehicle, via the 2026 Act mandamus.
Thank you. That's covered much more comprehensively than I would have done, so thank you for that. So if members are agreed, we'll move on to the next item on our agenda, which is item 9, and that is the SL1 on Special Educational Needs SEN Regulations 2026. So I propose that we deal with this quite quickly, as I think the action arising from this hopefully should be quite straightforward. So I'd refer members to the Special Educational Needs Code of Practice that's been provided for them at page 20 of tabled papers, and members will be aware it's a substantial document. That's maybe an understatement. It is that there's a lot of material to consider there. So with that in mind, the Citizen Space Survey in relation to this SL1 is due to close on the 27th of March, so that is just Friday of this week. So I would want to suggest that with the draft Code of Practice now being shared with committee, I do think that we need to offer anyone who might want to comment on this SL1 the opportunity to respond to the citizen space with that information in front of them, and I think really also for members to have a bit more time with that document before we move to full consideration of it. So I would like to suggest, if members are in agreement, to add that code of practice that has been provided to the committee website, and then extend the closing date for the citizen space survey to the 8th of May 2026, just given the volume of material there. Are members agreed? Agreed. Okay. So we can move on then to item 10 on the agenda, which is correspondence. So pages 85 to 185 of your packs, and pages 404 to 413 of tabled papers, where we have a range of items tabled under correspondence. So the summary note is page 185 of your packs, and I'll just run through anything that requires committee discussion or decision. Other than that, we'll deal with it as per the summary note. So item 10.2 in page 93 is a response from the Department of Education regarding the use of restrictive practices in educational settings, and it provides copies of correspondence between the Department, the Royal College of Nursing, the Northern Ireland Commissioner for Children and Young People, and the Children's Law Centre. I think largely as the consultation on this is now out into the public domain, and that will then progress, I imagine, to statutory guidance being produced. A lot of this is possibly a moot point. I would note that we have a case of it took 5 months for the department to write to some of these key stakeholders to acknowledge their departure from the task and finish group, which I think is disappointing. It does seem an unusually long delay. But that aside, I think given we have the public consultation out there, I would propose to note, unless there's any other views. Agreed to note. Item 10.3, page 102 is correspondence from Caleb's Cause, seeking a meeting with the committee on the 14 to 19 framework. Happy to hear members' views, but I would certainly want to suggest, I think in terms of evidence we would want to hear, but between now and the end of this session, I would be very keen to hear from the Caleb's Cause campaign. It may well, depending on how it times, to be able to factor that into some of our SEN inquiry, depending on where that lands, but it's certainly evidence we should hear, in my view. Donna, you want to come in?
Completely agree, and I think for all of us, whatever contributions we can make as members and through legislation as a committee or private members' bills or the overarching from ministers, I think we should be exploring all of that. So that goes right across all departments, so we do have a part to play in it, so it'll be great to hear from them and see what we can do.
No, absolutely. I'm certainly happy to extend that invite if members are all agreed. Great. Okay, item 10.4, page 103. It's further correspondence from the Benedict Blythe Foundation. Provides a copy of correspondence to the Minister of Education, updating him on the inclusion of the Foundation's core aims through new statutory guidance on supporting children with medical conditions and allergies in schools in England, and they're seeking a meeting with them. The committee agreed at its last meeting to share the Minister's response on these issues with the Benedict Blythe Foundation. So happy to seek views views, but I mean, other than being kept up to date with how that process runs, I would propose that we note at this stage if we're in agreement. Okay. Item 10.7, page 179, it's a response from the EA providing further information on the work of the Educational Welfare Service arising from a recent briefing. Happy to hear members' views, but I would like to propose to note unless there's any specific follow-ups there. Agreed to note. Okay. Item 10.9, page 421 of tabled papers is further correspondence regarding SEN provision at St Paul's High School in Bestbrook. The committee had agreed to write to the Minister and the Education Authority regarding their accommodation needs for SEN provision, so we'll obviously wait for that to come through, but are members content to add the correspondence to evidence for the SEN inquiry and to note a pending response from both the Minister and EA? Is that agreed?
Right.
Agreed. Item 10.10, page 430, tabled papers, it's correspondence from the Accord Partnership providing a response to information provided by the EA at the Education Committee meeting last week. I would propose in this case that we share that correspondence with the EA and seek a response to each of the points that they have made, if members are agreed. Agreed. Item 10.11, page 464, tabled papers is correspondence from the Independent Autism Reviewer asking for me as chair to take part in a short video for the launch of our first annual report, which I'm sure will be a treat for anybody who gets to watch that. Are we agreed that I represent the committee and take part in that video?
A better man.
Thank you.
I don't know about that, Sharon.
You don't have a discussion about it. If you want to volunteer, I am very happy to take up the mantle.
Have to watch
it. Okay, other than that, our members agreed to dispose of the correspondence as per the summary note at page 185. Great. Okay, that takes us to item 11 on the forward work programme, which is at page 187 of your packs. So really just two very quick points, which would be on the early learning and childcare strategy. I appreciate there were personal circumstances which meant that the briefing couldn't go ahead today, which I'm perfectly understanding of, but would be keen if there was any scope to bring that briefing forward a bit sooner after recess. I'm not sure how viable that is, but if members are agreed, if we could take forward that request. Yeah, okay. And then the other thing is, obviously, I think members will see there's a fair number of gaps in the programme after recess, but that is intentional in terms of just bearing in mind the amount of legislative material that's coming through, and also the inquiry work to be concluded as well. And I think, as well as the primary legislation, the scrutiny of that SL1 is likely to be time consuming. So it's just to reassure members that that we're never short of evidence sessions if we need to fill those, but we are just building in that bit of slack around legislation. But other than that, are we content to note the forward work programme? Yeah.
Can I just say that British Heart Foundation wanted to have a session with SIA and EA, and actually they've engaged and are happy to do it as a paper exercise if members want to make that saving in the evidence sessions just now. And Danny has given me 6 stakeholders for his bill, so if anybody else wants to have stakeholders for either of the PMBs, please let me know and I'll make provisional contact.
Did you mention earlier we're going to do a stakeholder event around early years?
Yes, so that was the other thing to consider. We had discussed the possibility of running a stakeholder event around early years issues in particular. So I suppose it would be to get committee agreement if there is appetite and interest in that. It's obviously we want to make sure that members will engage and participate. I don't want to send the clerk away on a mission to put an event together if there isn't the appetite. So happy to hear from members on that. It's certainly something I'd be content to take forward. Yeah. Was there a particular theme around the early learning themes, in particular that element of the strategy?
The strategy, I think both of those aspects would be important.
Okay. Agreed. David?
Is there any benefit to inviting health officials to that?
I think absolutely. That would be a good opportunity perhaps to pick up some of those issues from our evidence sessions today around health visiting and the data sharing, all of those issues that come around. So yeah.
Okay, so we had booked a room for the 14th, but that's maybe, the chair was kind of saying with the 2 PMBs and plenary, that's maybe too busy a week.
I don't want to speak on behalf of committee. I had just suggested that the first day back or the second day back after recess with 2 bits of legislation coming through at second stage, it might have been just biting off a bit more than we could chew, and perhaps to just move that on a little bit if members are agreed.
So even just to get people get notice to attend.
Yeah,
It would be-
yeah.
For
I
Easter's
think
coming.
so,
like,
yeah,
so.
yeah. And to give you
Super.
your team time to organise as well. So
Okay.
that's fine.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so we're agreed. That takes us then to item 12, which is any other business. Is there any other business? No. Item 13 is date, time and place of next meeting, and that will be Wednesday the 15th of April 2026, 2 p.m. in room 29 and online. And I'll put the question on that basis that the committee meeting does now adjourn. Are we agreed?
Great.
Thank you.
Committee Room 29. Sound. Committee Room 29. Sound. Committee Room 29. Sound.